So today's reading is from Essence of the Bhagavad Gita, and Kriyabans are learning this as we speak. Dharmarajan is teaching the Saturday class, the Kriyaban class on this, and it is very easy to read and very devotional. It's not something you read and think, now what did that mean? That's kind of hard to figure out. Instead, Swamiji and Master have really made it accessible to all of us, and it's very practical in our everyday life too. Okay, so I'm going to read from chapter 3, verse 33. Even the wise act according to the dictates of their own nature. All living beings obey the dictates of nature. Of what avail would be mere suppression? And the commentary is, Krishna offered to the world, through the Bhagavad Gita, not only the highest truths expressed comprehensively and at great length, but a teaching of supreme common sense. This 33rd stanza is a beautiful example of the reasonableness of his teaching. The Lord says to Arjuna, work with things as they are. History indeed, perhaps the history of religion especially, is full of people trying to convince others to be something other than what they are. Wars have been fought, persecutions inflicted, and revolutions stirred up in the name of making people think and become what others think they ought to be. Krishna in this passage says very reasonably, work with what is, not with what you think it ought to be. All human suffering is due to the simple thought that things ought to be other than they are. Even great physical pain can be transcended after accepting it as it is. Try this practice. First, calmly recognize its existence. Second, center yourself at the heart of the pain. Finally, simply release it. You will find that complete acceptance of it empowers you to do that relinquishing. Don't let others tell you what you ought, in their eyes, to be. On the other hand, never dismiss their advice arrogantly. Try at the same time, rather, to be always true to your own nature. You will never change yourself by suppression. Real change comes only by transcendence. If there is some quality in yourself that you don't like, try to raise your awareness to a higher level. If you find that you simply can't ignore that pain, however, then try to get to the heart of it. When mentally you arrive at its very center, offer the pain up to God. If you practice this suggestion with a strong effort of will, you may find that you can become in an instant a very different person. And the next stanza, attraction and repulsion regarding sense objects belong to the natural ebb and flow of duality. I'm to read this stanza too, right? Okay. Beware of them both equally, for they are man's greatest enemies. I'll read it again since I interrupted it. Attraction and repulsion regarding sense objects belong to the natural ebb and flow of duality. Beware of them both equally, for they are man's greatest enemies. And the commentary is, attraction and repulsion are extreme forms of likes and dislikes. To like anything excessively is virtually by definition just as great an error as to dislike its opposite. The realization of God depends on neutralizing one's own reactions, on leveling out their peaks and their valleys, and seeing the one changeless spirit at the heart of everything. The secret is not to cease from enjoying anything. That solution leads only to apathy and, in consequence, to a deadening of awareness. The secret, rather, is to take every enjoyment into the heart, to feel its cause as lying there in your reactions, and then to draw that energy consciously upward in the spine from the heart to the brain. Ordinary likes and dislikes are not, as such, man's enemies. Rather, they are like troublesome neighbors. Extreme forms of these emotions, however, strong attraction and violent repulsion, can plunge a person into violent storms of emotion that toss him helplessly about on great waves of delusion. Never let yourself become infatuated. Infatuation is extreme attraction with anything or anyone. Develop an attitude, rather, of accepting this dream as it is, even if it becomes a nightmare. Your only hope is to escape to a higher level of consciousness. Some people do have ugly traits. Don't waste energy on reacting to them, neither by dislike nor by abhorrence. Don't welcome them into your galaxy of interests. Move through life like a swan, rather, off of whose back the rain flows lightly, never touching its body. Protect your heart's feelings from the excitement of all extreme reactions. Surround those feelings by emanating peace and goodwill. Relax in the heart. Relax also outward from the heart to the shoulders. Then direct your heart's energy upward through the spine to the brain. When there are people around you shouting angrily, for instance, and especially when they shout personally at you, relax inwardly. Be centered in the self. Smile in your heart and remind yourself, I love God alone.
It's a joy to see you all here this morning, and so nice to hear Krishna's words in the Gita and then also explained by Swamiji according to Master's interpretations. That who doesn't want that state that Krishna describes, that joy under all circumstances, that peace that cannot be taken away. So much of our difficulties in life comes from our own peace being taken away, because there are marauders, there are bandits that are seeking to take it away in the form of Maya. I wasn't speaking of specific people and mentioning their names, but thinking rather instead this tendency, as it said, this attraction and repulsion, these likes and dislikes belong to the natural order of Maya. In fact, it's very unnatural. Natural in the sense that it surrounds us and it's the nature of this universe, but unnatural in the sense that it isn't our true state. How do we know? Well, if for no other reason than we don't like it. We don't like riding an emotional roller coaster. It can be especially difficult if it's someone else's emotional roller coaster. If you've had that experience, I don't just mean, I'm seeing a lot of laughing and nods. I don't just mean somebody shouting all the time and you have to sort of walk into the room to see what the weather's like today. Is it peaceful or is it another fireball storm? And we have to sort of tiptoe and dance around someone like that. It's not pleasant. And it's also helpful to keep in mind if one wonders, gosh, is that coming from me? A friend of mine said when she was coming here in my home, there was so much shouting. And I said, oh, I'm sorry. And she said, yes, I do most of the shouting. I said, I see. I could think of a solution then. But so the other side of it, though, is that I didn't just mean that kind of roller coaster. I mean somebody who's so happy and then so sad. Someone writes this long letter or tells us their heart story, and we feel for them. And we say, oh, my gosh, I'm so sorry. And we, I'll pray for you and everything. And then we, find out a week later, how are you doing? Just like, what? Oh, I'm fine. And we think, I was spending the whole week wringing my hands, imagining this poor person suffering, and meanwhile they've practically even forgotten what it was about. And so why did I put myself through that whole journey? Well, as we grow, as we meditate, we become more sensitive to others and their feelings, and we become more compassionate. And it's partly that we feel more harmony first in ourselves, and then when that harmony is disturbed by others, instead of, blaming them, you're disturbing my harmony, more that we naturally feel worried for them or hurt for them and so on, and a desire to help them. It's important to remember, as Swamiji often pointed out, that you don't help someone who's drowning in sorrow by jumping in and drowning with them. That you stand from level ground and you lower a pole, you lower a rope, you give them some flotation device, but you help to pull them to safety. Don't just dive into the same mess with them. And if you find that you can't, because, someone says, well, I'm so sad, and you say, well, but you might be happy tomorrow. No, I won't. Shut up. And you say, well, if you can't think of anything that can be received in that moment, you may just have to pray in silence from a distance. Just, God, help this person, bless this person, give them the right advice, the right suggestions that I can't give them, and do it from a place of caring, but let them be. After all, we have to, each of us, climb out of our own little pits of delusion. This is how we develop strength, as it said in the affirmation, that we become happier and wiser. It is through wisdom, through understanding, which comes from only one thing, experience. The only way we can truly know something is if we have that experience. Just talking about it, just quoting it, all these things are useful. It's good to know where we should be headed, definitely. But the only time we can claim anything is if we have an experience of it. This is what Sri Yukteswar said to Master in Autobiography of a Yogi, that don't claim to know, don't sort of speak from just intellectual knowledge. He said, once you have realized a truth and taken it firmly into your cells, then you may diffidently, which means sort of shyly, hesitatingly, vouch for its meaning. Meaning, when you've lived a whole life in it, then you might say, I think it might be this. And that's how Swamiji was. And a lot. He would say, I wonder if this might be true. Or, I'm not sure, but I think that we might try this approach. And we learned to observe that when he said that, he had meditated on it for sometimes years, sometimes decades. And then he proposed it very, not shyly and not hesitatingly in the sense of being unsure, but gently. And I think partly, if nothing else, he was training us, showing us how we should behave, as opposed to saying, this is how it is. I had a friend who was going to take the vow of brahmacharya, and there was another young man who was of his past acquaintance who came up to him and said, what does brahmacharya mean to you? And so my friend gave, I think, a half of a line answer, and then this other person interrupted him and gave a half-hour long speech about something or other with plenty of Sanskrit, interspersed within it and so on. Just amazing to me how sometimes, people can be. He wasn't a brahmachari himself. He didn't know anything about this path. He had asked the question. He had at least learned that much, that you're supposed to ask the question and pretend interest in the answer. But then he couldn't help himself, and before the answer came, he dove in and said, this is the answer. That kind of speaking in quotes, that kind of preaching, is only satisfying to oneself for a time. It's not satisfying to anyone else. But even oneself, in time, it grows to become dissatisfying. Because in the beginning, as it says in the Autobiography of a Yogi, someone being able to spout such things, the ego is flattered that it can grasp such complexity. I read that and I was horrified, because I was a college student and I loved mathematics. And the more complicated that I could understand, the better. Very satisfying. And then it said the ego is flattered that it can grasp such complexity. And I thought, oh my God, it's exactly true. It's exactly right. And then also it said, Sri Yukteswar says, and he was a jnani. He was a jnana yogi. He was a jnana avatar. So, he was the authority in one sense from his own experience and realization on jnana. And he said that he said the scholars, he said they smell unduly of the lamp. You know, especially like if you have an oil lamp or a ghee lamp that has a certain scent to it, that just sitting at the lamp, just sitting at the desk, he said their careful intellectual setting up, philosophy is for them a careful, gentle, intellectual setting up exercise. In other words, let's pretend we have this problem and then let's solve it. This would happen in math all the time too. It was sort of like, here's the actual problem. Well, that's too hard, so let's just solve it for x equals 1. Ah, excellent. Easy. I have solved something. You know, congratulations, but that's not the problem. And in case any of this makes you wonder when you get hit with a whole bunch of scriptures that how could we possibly learn such things, or a whole bunch of math if I have gotten carried away, then remember Master's statement from the scriptures, he is the cleverest who finds God. And so that comes out all the time. If we get approached and somebody gives us all kinds of things that we've never heard before, this happened to Swamiji. Someone was asking him, was referring to the chakras in India when he was in India many years ago, not recently. And they used some of the Sanskrit names for the chakras, you know, like Manipura and so on. And Swamiji didn't know those words. And the person said, you know, how can you even speak a word on Ashtanga Yoga if you do not know these words of the chakras? And he just couldn't get off that Swamiji didn't know these words. Swamiji's explanation was simple. Master didn't use them. That's all it was. It wasn't that Master didn't know them. And it isn't that Master didn't teach them for any particular reason, but, you know, what really helps you connect more? The Anahata Chakra or the heart center? Even here in India. Remember, there's more English speakers in India than any other country in the world. It's the heart center. I mean, if you say, no, for me, Anahata Chakra, fine. But, you know, there can so easily be, you know, as soon as I open my mouth to say something in Sanskrit, there can be a little bit of pride. Listen. Not anahata, anahata. Anahata. No, anahata, you wonder why sometimes foreigners give up in despair. So, that was the thing. Master didn't use those words. If you use those words, we use those words. Swamiji later in life used the Sanskrit words. There was nothing about them, obviously. It's a sacred language. It's a sacred teaching. It's what we've given our lives to. It was nothing that was wrong with it. But this sense that not knowing this word, I mean, I wonder if he asked, well, what is the word for Anahata Chakra in Portuguese? You see, it's the language has nothing to do, the definition has nothing to do, or comparatively is nothing compared to the experience. You see, Master didn't say these Sanskrit words. He didn't say whatever it is. But he was beyond the chakras. He had passed through the chakras. He was self-realized. He told Swamiji you would find God at the end of life. Self-realization. He didn't say you will find God at the end of life if you learn these Sanskrit words. And remember, you know, who was one of the greatest scholars of all? Shankaracharya, Adi Shankaracharya. And what did he say in Bhaja Govindam? And I could try to quote it in Sanskrit, but it would go against the purposes of my talk if I tried to. So I won't. But he says to the pundit who is reciting grammar rules, you know, conjugating verbs or whatever it was, saying the different forms, he says, "Seek God, O fool, for when the appointed time comes," meaning grammar rules surely will not save you. And so, again, it's the irony is that is, you know, he on one level he's the one we all bow to in terms of wisdom and everything, and yet he wrote this wonderful. He wrote many chants, devotional chants and songs, but this particular one, he himself says, there's no need for it. Again, I don't mean it's wrong. Learning is fine, but pride and satisfaction, being content, it's just dry nothingness. This is also what was true of Chaitanya, that he was going through just singing God's name. And there was this other older man who was a scholar and a pundit. His name was Sarvabhauma. And he saw this young man with radiant face and said, "Oh, what a beautiful soul this is, and what a inspiration it is to see. But what a shame that all he can say is Hare Krishna, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare." He doesn't really, I mean, it's fine, but there's much greater wisdom that we have in our teachings than that, just, in and of itself. And so he's to try to interest this young man, Chaitanya. Sarvabhauma gave him quoted a line from Scripture, and then interpreted it in, I think, 30 different ways. And that was a mark of his genius, a mark of his insight, which is actually quite a teaching in itself, that instead of saying this means this, that's the only thing it means, which is more a tendency in Western logic, which is very common in India too, obviously. And there's a certain usefulness to that, because you can get very clear, but it's not actually true. Because, what is the true purpose of a person? What is their real and only definition? It can't be. A woman, for example, is a daughter and a mother if she is, and a sister if she is. And she also works in a job that really has nothing to do with her family at all, perhaps. And she's also a student and maybe a teacher. And you see, any one person, you can't say this is what they are, because beyond all these things, we're just souls. She's not even a she. The soul has no gender. And so when Sarvabhauma was showing he could interpret the Scripture in so many different ways, he was showing two things. One, that this truth is so central, that it's so close to the heart of reality that it can extend and touch all these different things. And that is what we're all seeking in our seeking of wisdom, that central truth. But on the other hand, he was showing his ability to connect it to all these different things. Sort of the intellectual weightlifting contest. He could do 30 reps with this quote from the Scripture and show its interpretations. And Chaitanya said, "That is wonderful." I forgot to mention, Sarvabhauma said, "I'd like to teach you something." And Chaitanya said, "I would be very happy to learn from you." Now, when Sarvabhauma did the 30 things and then said, "So?" He probably didn't say it like that, but still, Chaitanya said, "It's so wonderful. Let me see if I can think of even one more." And he came up with another 80. What Sarvabhauma didn't know is that Chaitanya had been a great scholar, and before all of this, that he had been, the head of some university or something like that, and having reached the peak of such knowledge, that he realized then that it was just loving God, just love God, and so on. So that was a realization that he had come to, as I was saying, in a similar way to Shankaracharya. So when we reach the limits of wisdom, we go also into devotion. You can't help it. It awakens the heart's natural love if you really see these truths, feel these truths, and live by them. But this only comes from experience. And so when a pundit came to Sri Yukteswar and was, again, I don't know what it is about people. Maybe in seeing Sri Yukteswar they felt threatened, and then to say, "I'm going to show you what I know." Same thing with Master. He said when these pundits came out to test him, sent by the Maharaja, he said he could see they were sort of itching for a theological bullfight, getting paces and pulling out the Scriptures and turning and sharpening their pencils and getting ready to go for it. And the same thing with Sri Yukteswar. This man came in, and as Master said, the rafters of the house were shaking with his thunderous quotes from the Gitas, the Vyasas of Shankara, and all these things. And when he finally finished, and their sort of echo died down, Sri Yukteswar said, "I am waiting to hear you." And the pundit looked shocked, and Sri Yukteswar said, Quotations there have been in superabundance. And Master said he was sitting in the corner, a respectful distance from the visitor, but convulsing in mirth, just shaking in laughter. And then he said, Sri Yukteswar continued, but what of these truths have you realized personally? How have these teachings renovated your own nature? And the man said, I have no realization. Which was good. That was a good realization. You see, it's how have these truths changed us? If they haven't changed us, it's not that they're not worth anything, but we haven't used them properly. This is sometimes the hypocrisy that you see, that people will quote something and be happy to say it, but not do anything about it. Not change. And I don't mean that we should go around pointing out that in others. I just mean if somebody's coming at you with their sharpened pencil, that you just say, look, God bless you, I'm doing the best I can. It's good for us. These challenges to our egos, these challenges to our sense of self are very good for us. Why? Because if we find ourselves disappointed, which can happen all the time, at least speaking personally, someone who we thought was a friend suddenly turns on us. Why does that happen? It's interesting. And there's a lot of possible reasons. But one thing Swamiji wrote in his last book, Love Perfected, Life Divine, he said, the world envies nothing so much as a happy heart. And it goes on to say how be careful or be aware that your closest friends may turn on you. And it's because of that envy. We see that a lot. Swamiji points this out. Why is it that people, when someone tries to live for high ideals, everyone gets upset about it? Or at least the people closest to him often do. He said, I have known that if I, in my family, and my own family, he said, if I had become a drunk, nobody would have minded. Not compared to what he did do. Because he said they would have clicked their tongues and said, oh, too bad. But when we try to grow spiritually, sometimes those in our lives say, don't you dare try to be better than me. And why? And why do they fight against it so furiously? I mean, why do they just not care? Oh, he likes this, I like cricket. And I know it's possible to like both. But, why isn't it just a matter of taste? Why does it have to be such a big deal? Because obviously if someone fights, it's threatening to them. They're fighting back as they perceive it. And why would that be? Swamiji points out that people fight against idealism usually because they themselves have considered that idealism and given up on it, said, no, it can't be. We all want joy. We all want happiness. What kid do you see? What do you want to be when you grow up? I want to be depressed. No. I mean, what do you want? I'm hoping to be trapped in an unhappy marriage. Nobody has that as a goal. Everybody, I want joy, I want happiness, I want unlimited candy supply. But there's always this sense of fulfillment. I want peace. I want comfort. And nobody comes looking for the opposite. But you see sometimes people stuck in the opposite. And I say that compassionately. I don't mean like, well, serves you right. Nothing like that, really. But it often is when people have given up on their ideals. I tried that, it didn't work. I wanted this, it didn't happen. And that's part of what we experience in life, surely, these disappointments. That then when someone dares to dream that it is possible, then they fight against that. Because part of my survival is in accepting this is all I can have and not more. That's one of the reasons why people fight against idealism. So, we can understand that. But remember, in this world we are all free. And why is that? Well, for one reason, as it says, this entire world is just a dream. And I was thinking, how could we experience that? One is, I wonder, if you see a video of yourself from some years ago, and maybe there's something going on, or you see how happy you are, you see yourself struggling, you see yourself at a party, and the camera catches one angle that we didn't realize was caught. This happened to me once when there was a film of all this gathering of friends, and I was in a bad mood because I had just been harassed by some of the friends. And the camera came to me, and now you see me going, not at anyone, but just, and it's like captured on film. And so when we all got back and then we were like, let's watch the video we just made, and they went, you look mad. And I said, oh yeah, I was just kidding. Because I was still mad. But there it was. But it's like if we see that video 20 years from now, we just laugh at it. Like, oh, that's fine. I had many other things to be mad about since then. That one is nothing compared to those. And we see it as just kind of something we went through. It's just kind of a joke. It doesn't even really matter anymore. It was just a scene. And that's how this whole life is. It's just a scene. It's a learning experience for us, and that's what we're here to do, is to learn. And so let's get learning, as we are. I mean, of course you are. And how, as Dharmini was reading in the Gita, Master Swamiji said, the only solution is to change your level of consciousness. It's the only solution. And how do we do that, of course, but meditation, Kriya Yoga, chanting, coming here, spending time with others. We can meditate on our own a lot, and that's very necessary. It's helpful also to meditate with others, because our gathered energy uplifts one another. We also help strengthen one another, because even though we have been, if we're all insane, as sometimes pronounced by our friends, a verdict pronounced by our friends and relatives, then this is the asylum. Because we all end up coming here and gathering and saying, you're just as crazy as I am, so we can make sense to each other. It's not. It's the opposite. How do I tell this story exactly? A friend of mine went with me to see a psychiatrist because the friend was concerned for my welfare. And the friend sat me, because, and I knew I had to go because someone says, you're crazy. And you say, no, I'm not. That's just what crazy people say. So I knew it was hopeless to argue on a level of logic. And so I happily went along to the psychiatrist with my friend. Yeah, what friend would do this but one's own parent? I'll leave it at that. So that was the person. Yeah, like, hey, do you want to go to the psychiatrist and then get a coffee? No, it was a parent. And so the parent took me there, and I knew, someone later said to me, what would you have done if the psychiatrist said you were insane? And I thought, it never occurred to me that could have been an outcome. You're right. What would I have ended up sort of in a straitjacket or something? I'm glad that never occurred to me. I might not have been so bold, but I just said, sure, let's go. Because I felt confident that I could convince any psychiatrist. So we went to, not a psychiatrist, but a doctor, and meaning a general physician. I don't mean to say psychiatrists aren't doctors. I just meant a general practitioner. And so this this parent of mine said to the physician to grow up in this country, America, and to not see that money is not only necessary, but is the only thing, the only fulfillment in life, is insane. And so the physician turned to the parent, and said, or it could be incredibly sane. And I just thought, I didn't have to say another word, though it went on. And so it's true. It's like that sometimes insanity recognizes sanity only as insanity, because it's so different. But the thing is, we all are wanting that joy. That's what, going back to this thing about likes and dislikes are unnatural to us. Why? Because they don't make us happy. So there's something inside of us that these things are not fulfilling. Part of our nature is not fulfilled by all of these ups and downs. And so why, on the other hand, is meditation so fulfilling? Especially when, like I said, we do it with devotion. When we do it with a sense of connection and openness, because it is feeding our own nature. I said meditation makes you more sensitive to the feelings of others. I don't know if that's really true. I think what it does is it uncovers or makes us aware of the sensitivity that we always had. You know, some people are very sensitive and they don't know it. So in some cases, they get into moods all the time because of the moods of the people around them. But they don't have enough distance or perspective or inner calmness at that time or sometimes to see, you know, I'm upset for that person. That's what I was saying. Someone has got this really big thing. We pray for them. We worry about them for a week. And then we find out they've forgotten about the whole thing. But meanwhile, we've been riding this roller coaster for them. Why do we do that? I've wondered about that myself. I find myself doing that sometimes. I think it's partly because I feel they shouldn't suffer. They shouldn't be hurt, which I think on one level is true. On another level, this is only what gives rise to wisdom. But then I think, why should I be so concerned whether they suffer or not? Well, because if they suffer, then I feel it, and I don't want to feel it. Okay, that's some side of it. But the other side of it, too, I think, is that their suffering reminds me of my suffering. Even past suffering, not necessarily present suffering. Their suffering reminds me of my own past suffering, and I don't want to feel that. Not just the memory of the past. I don't want to go back in time and feel that horrible thing or whatever it was. And that's a clue then to me that there is something that I have not yet accepted. Remember what Swamiji says in the Gita, that as Dharmini read, that the key to it is acceptance. That if we can accept that this chapter in our life was part of the script. Unfortunately, God only gives us the script, not even one page at a time or one line at a time, but one word at a time. So we don't get to see too far ahead. But it was always in the script. How do we know? Because it happened. Do you think God didn't notice? Do you think he wasn't on patrol? Do you think he yawned and oops, right when you ran out into traffic? I'm assuming you survived, because here you are now. But he didn't. His eye is always on you. As Krishna says in the Gita, he who watches me always, him I watch always. He never loses sight of me, nor I lose sight of him. And so in this same way, this whatever has happened in our lives has been part of our training, part of the script. I don't mean to say, therefore, it doesn't matter. Therefore, if it hurts, well, too bad. Who cares? It's just part of the script. No, that it's been part of the script also for us to work with that pain. If there's a battle in our lives, an ongoing battle, that's part of the script too. Acceptance doesn't mean I accept people's verdict about me. I accept what they tell me to do. It means I accept that they are telling me what to do. But I also accept that I have to resist it because I can't do it, because it's not my destiny. What if men cry, your dream is not our own. Your soul knows the answer. Go on alone. And so, in the same way, we can feel strengthened that we have to find what is true. Sometimes people are telling us to do something and they're right, and we haven't yet seen it. Even then, we have to come to truth in our own terms, in our own time, in our own way. It helps us to listen to especially the wise. When I wanted to get on the spiritual path, I faced great opposition, not only from my parents, as I've alluded to already, but also from friends, from family, and so on. I mean, a greater family, just about everybody. And it was hard for me to understand, because when I wanted to learn to play squash, which is, like racquetball or tennis, except you hit it against the wall, nobody minded. When I was learning German, nobody was offended. But when I wanted to somehow practice yoga, forget it. No way. How can you do this to me? Huh? What? I was so confused, because to me, in everything I had done, maybe not the squash and the racquetball, but I was seeking truth. I had always been trying to find truth my whole life. I cared. What is true? That's just something I came in with. I don't know. I think we all do as truth seekers and devotees. We have to. And so when this was the new way to find truth, this was the truth, getting closer. Why was it different from anything else that I had done? But suddenly there was all this resistance. One friend of mine, close friend, said, I have already learned that religion is fake and that people who are spiritual are hypocritical. Maybe you need to learn that yourself. And that was the most I could get out of him. It wasn't a true attitude. Yes, he had been hurt, and yes, I was sorry for that. But he hadn't had this experience of truth. He hadn't gone through Autobiography of a Yogi. He hadn't come to meet, Swami Kriyananda or somebody else like that. He just had his one experience and then sort of passed the verdict on the whole lot. As the one person said in a story Master told, "Goodbye God and all your crazy crowd." This man basically felt that way. It was all just a bunch of craziness. So I had to leave that friendship. We just grew apart. That happens too. I still feel great affection for him, but we don't have a lot in common to talk about anymore. And so we don't talk. But I send prayers when I think of him. But that great opposition that I faced was very, very difficult for me. It was not, "What if men cry, your dream is not our own? Ha ha! My soul knows the answer. Go on alone." That was my favorite song because that song expressed the strength that I was trying to develop in myself. The only strength I had was that of not giving up. I couldn't argue with them, I couldn't convince them, and I could not feel at peace about it. I almost had ulcers, really. My stomach started to hurt chronically. But I couldn't also give up on what I felt was right. That was the only blessing that I had, is I wouldn't give in. But I wouldn't smile, I wasn't relaxed, I was miserable. But I wouldn't give in. Because I couldn't, my heart wouldn't let me turn away from what I felt was the right thing. And so, as this struggle and opposition went on, I felt more and more, upset about it, betrayed, because my friends didn't care what I wanted. They just wanted to yell at me and so on. But in time, I did develop that strength, partly just by coming to a place filled with devotees. And them each reminding me, I'm also the black sheep of the family too. And so it's like we're all black sheep here. And so we all match. We all, get along. We all blend together. I remember once when I first announced my intention to move to Ananda village, or move to Ananda full time, I got the answer back over the phone that your father says he'll disown you. And I was just in shock. I'd never been disowned before. It was the first time. And I didn't even know it was something that could happen. And I just walked into the kitchen of the Expanding Light. And they said, "So, how are you?" I said, "I've just, been told I'm going to be disowned." And someone said, "Oh, don't worry about that. I was disowned for a few weeks. Don't worry. They always take you back." Someone said, yeah. They always say disowned. And nobody ever means it. Don't worry. You'll be repossessed sooner, or later, and so on. And I was. And so it was just the perfect thing. That just, you'll go through it. You'll come back. It is true. And so that what was the best thing, what most interesting for me, tying sort of two of these threads together, I said some people fight against idealism, sometimes because also they haven't yet found it in their lives. In a way we yearn, and they want it. Not, well, you haven't found it in your life. No, we sometimes yearn for something to commit ourselves to. But when someone finds it, then sometimes other people can be a little jealous. A friend of mine said, "It's not fair because you have always known what you've wanted to do." Meaning computer science. You knew you wanted to do computer science. Now you want to do the spiritual thing. You've always known, and I don't know what I want to do. I felt for him. It was a very, angry but sincere thing to say. And I didn't know how to explain it either, because I couldn't say, "Well, when I was 5, I decided." No, I just knew. I started using computers when I was 5. That's why I said it. It was just, I just gravitated toward them. It wasn't anything that I developed or anything. And I wasn't particularly gifted at it, but it was definitely a passion. Now, this other thought then, I'm sorry, I got distracted. A pully just ran behind Master. I don't know what his message was, but I just kind of, yes? you've always known what you've... Well, yes, there it was. So when I committed myself and decided I am going to graduate with a master's, which is a nice way of saying dropping out of the PhD program, that I am going to go and do this thing, then, and I had decided I'm doing it. I'm going to move to Ananda. I'm going to be a school teacher in the private school there, the Living Wisdom School. And then I was telling some of the professors at MIT were asking me, so what are you doing, or where are you going, and so on. And, some of them were nobody was harsh about it or anything, but it was hard to explain, And also it's just like, are you rejecting? How can you have what's here and then reject it? People don't like that either. How can you have what I have and say, no, it's no good, I want this instead? We would feel that. We can feel that. Someone is a part of things, then they leave, no, I found this is better. There can be an instinctive thing that, hey, but this is a good thing and I like it, and if you don't like it, is something wrong with me? Of course not. You found your own thing. It's right for you. Be strong in it. If it's not for someone else, okay, that's all right. If it is, good. But if not, that's all right. Let them find their way, but be strong in your way. You don't need to worry about anybody else. So, but once I was clear, I'm doing this, I was still nervous, but I had made my mind after years of wringing my hands. I asked one professor, she said, and I had very little interaction with her, so I didn't really know her at all. And she said, so I heard you're doing something. What are you doing? And I said, I'm moving to California to Silicon Valley, which is like, okay, did you work for Google? No, to teach in a private school for children. And she said, that sounds very interesting. That's wonderful. And I thought, I wasn't sure if she was saying sincerely, that sounds wonderful, or if she was just like, what do you say to a crazy person except, good job, go for it, yes. So I don't know where she was coming from, but I appreciated not being stabbed once again in that moment, so I will take whatever I could get. But another person said to me, who did know me well, and she had been a professor, she had been sort of someone who wrote a recommendation for me to get into school and all. I had gotten to know her somewhat. She said, because I had talked to her about this and my sort of frustration, she said, in a way I envy you, because you have found something that you are passionate about, that you want to commit your life to, and I haven't found that. She said, even for all this, research and mathematics, it's not my passion. I see it is for some people, and I'm happy for them, but it's not mine. I'm still looking for that. So I envy you in that, she said. And I can't say that I appreciated that in the sense of, I'm glad you envy me, but it was more that I appreciated her sincerity. And it helped me to understand that that is something that we're all seeking. So when you find the truth as you understand it, then stick to it and then seek to experience it more. And the simplest way out of this whole maze is just practice Kriya, offer your love to God, and mix with other devotees. And in that way you will see that their strength becomes your strength. God's strength becomes your strength. And you will merge in Him. God bless you.